So today I'm speaking to Jacob Kristensen Illán. Jacob is the co-founder and CEO of Chemometric Brain. Chemometric Brain is a company that is using smart technology to improve how food quality is measured and controlled. Jacob has a background in computer science, and he helps the food companies that he works with use real-time data to make better, faster decisions about safety and quality. Jacob's work is all about making food production more reliable, efficient, and consistent, using tech that's practical and easy to apply in the real world. We're going to talk about his tech, and as you'll see in the session, it's super interesting, and the way that he's approaching how to help the industry, particularly small and medium-sized players in it, is I think really innovative and spot on. So looking forward to a good session. Today I have Jacob Kristensen with me. Jacob is the co-founder and CEO of Chemometric Brain. It's a super interesting solution that's growing quickly and is really relevant, I think, for food safety and what we're doing in the general food ecosystem. So Jacob, welcome, and great to have you here.
Thanks so much, Daniel. Very happy to be here and sharing with you guys a little bit of our story, and a story that I think definitely has a lot of relationship also to what you guys are doing.
Yeah, thanks for that. Well, let's start with it. Like, tell us the story. I mean, I see a little bit on your website, and obviously we'll point people to that website in the information about the podcast. But let me know, like, tell us how you got here, what you do, who are your co-founders, and what are you trying to accomplish?
Absolutely. So I think probably it's good to start with the top line of what we do. So at Chemometric Brain, we offer real-time chemical testing for the food industry, to provide them with information that they can leverage for quality control and production decisions. The reason why it's an important issue to resolve is that I think while there's been a lot of information that is available about a lot of other things in the food industry and supply chains in general, volumes, prices, and a lot of other things, there's limited amount of data about the quality and the composition of food products, and that's mostly down to the fact that for about the last 100 years, most of testing has gone on in external laboratories. So companies have sent samples out to laboratories, large companies like Eurofins, SGS, but actually, even by their own recognition, quite a fragmented industry where there's a lot of small local laboratories providing these types of services. And ultimately, what they're doing is they're aggregating very specific analytical methods that require quite a high level of throughput to actually provide an economic return on. So what we're doing is we're providing the same breadth of analysis, but by leveraging the technology that can much better generalize. So we're using optical technology and machine learning models. So leveraging essentially the interaction between light and matter. And I always make the comparison that is the easiest for us all to understand, which is in the same way that we can see colors. Right behind me, there's some gray, some green. Light is reflected at different wavelengths, and if we go beyond what is visible, what helps us see, and which is ultimately down to the pigments in the products, we can actually, in some other wavelengths, we can get information about the chemical composition of products. So we can use light to extract information about chemical composition. It's not interpretable as such in the same way that we can interpret colors with our eyes. And so we require different types of models to actually extract this information. And it's something that enables not just testing in-house for companies, not just testing that is in real time, but really testing for quite a broad set of parameters, and ultimately helping companies both monitor their production, which I think is interesting, ultimately, both from the raw material side, where there's limited amount of testing that is going on. Most people just get supplied with a certificate of analysis, and they accept that as being good, and that can cause issues, which all of a sudden, if you put a bad raw material into production, you might all of a sudden not have or have an issue with your product, and now something that could have been resolved, and you just could have called the supplier up and said, hey, you got to take this back and send me a new one. All of a sudden you now have a whole production that might be lost, and now we're talking about legal stuff, and you don't want to get lawyers involved. Then it becomes really expensive and slow. And so this is the type of philosophy that we have about really delivering information that is critical for companies, so that they can better their tendencies in terms of general quality, that helps them optimize their production and make decisions based on what's really there. And rather than a standard operating procedure, having what I like to call a dynamic operating procedure based on quality. And then, of course, just ensure ultimately that everything that you're producing is up to a certain specification. And if it's not, well, you can kind of make choices based on that.
Awesome. Well, there's a bunch of questions I'd like to unpack about how it works, and I think it's interesting because I know there's a big regulatory framework around this type of testing. But first, I'd love to know, how did you and your co-founders come up with this solution? Like, how did you get to where you are? Because it sounds like either you had a technology which was special and, found an obvious application, or you knew about this, very fragmented world of food quality testing, which I think if most people that have been around the food industry a little bit, myself included, can understand that this type of quality testing is, as you mentioned, done by lots of small fragmented labs everywhere, which is not necessarily efficient, but also difficult, I'm sure, for companies to deal with. But how did you get to the point of saying, hey, look, this is what we should do, right?
I think I've personally always been fascinated with food and the opportunities in creating efficiency. I think food is an industry I like to compare, whereas tech has cycles of 2 years, I think food probably has cycles that are 15 years. And one of the questions,
Longer, 30
even
years, I think.
longer.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So I
Okay.
always
Anyway,
wonder, how do we cut these things down? How do we make this industry much more dynamic? Because the reality is we're seeing constantly, and the reality is not only is the labs quite fragmented, but the food industry itself is tremendously fragmented. And I think that's a great thing. I actually think it's a great thing, but we need to arm all of these small companies with technologies to be as efficient, as dynamic as possible. And how do we reduce these cycles to be much more responsive to the market, ultimately to the changes in the environment, which affect the products that we consume. And in a world of increasing climate change, that's also a big worry. Ultimately, I've always been fascinated with these types of problems. My personal background is in computer science. Previous to Chemometric Brain, I was working on a different project that was much more consumer oriented, around the big challenge in helping consumers better use the resources that they have at home. The old challenge with going to the supermarket, buying a ton of stuff, and then as soon as it goes in your fridge, psychologically it loses all value, and then you end up wasting quite a bit of it. 1/3 of all food is wasted, and actually 40% of that waste is happening at the household level. So I was working on that challenge before, when I actually, well, for different reasons, that project was kind of tough. Consumer is a tough market to work in, and getting consumers to do stuff is quite the challenge. So I actually I started working with my co-founder Henrik as well, who has a long background in the food industry and success with building ingredients companies, where actually we were resolving a specific challenge for the ingredients business. So they had actually internally looked at how did they ensure that with a multinational footprint, they could control the composition of all these different ingredients that were going into everything from beverages, meat products, dairy products, I mean, all kinds of different products. And they wanted to ensure that the raw materials that they were receiving were consistent. So once R&D approves a raw material, you want to make sure that that's always the same thing. And if it's not, you want to get R&D involved again, because that's when you have an issue. And ingredients is it's a great point to start with, because it's quite a black box world. In fact, a lot of ingredients blends are actually holding a lot of food companies quite, let's call them sequester, kind of imprisoned to
hostage.
yeah,
You call
hostage.
them holding them hostage. Yeah. Yeah.
Hostage, that's the word. That's the one. So we started with actually resolving the challenge of how do we actually make sure that the composition is consistent, and then when you blend different ingredients, how do you optimize that blending time, and how do you ensure that the final formulation, the final composition of that blend is always consistent as well. And so we came across this technology where the sensors have existed for quite a while, and they've been used in industries like the dairy sector. In the milk world, a lot of milk payments are done based on protein, fat, and lactose analysis via this technology. It's also being used in animal feed for nutritional analysis, so that you can formulate for a specific nutritional profile, which is essential in animal growth. And so we started looking at, okay, we want to apply this technology, but there's really no other, there's nobody who's providing solutions with it. So we started very much, and we still are very much a company that's focused on software and machine learning, ultimately taking the signal from different instruments and converting that into something that is useful. And then the other big thing, of course, is then you start looking at the market and you start learning about, okay, what is it, the challenges that companies are facing? What types of challenges are companies facing? And so when we started as an independent company a little over 3 years ago, we actually started looking at we started looking at what other challenges we could resolve, right? Beyond ingredients, how do we start doing other stuff and solving other people's challenges? So we started working with different industries, for example, and I think one nice use case is what we do for Spanish jamón producers. So Spain is well known for jamón, and jamón has always been quite an artisanal process, and like it is in a lot of in a lot of spaces in the food industry. There's a lot of companies that are doing in between the 10 and 100 million euro dollar mark every year, and they're not exactly the most technical of companies in many cases, right? They're built on heritage, they're built on history, but efficiency is efficiency, and money is money, and ultimately, if you can produce in a much more efficient way, if you can produce a much higher quality product, that is always going to be a positive thing. So we started looking at other challenges, and going back to jamón again, an interesting challenge that we identified was both the salting process that happens before the curing had currently only been using the information about the weight of a ham or a leg of ham. And so
Mm.
ultimately, by incorporating information like the fatty acid profile, we could actually further optimize the salting process so we can ensure that the right amount of water is extracted from the product. And that means that there's less losses at the end of the cycle. So you have a reduced amount of loss and a better consistency on the final product as well that you're curing.
So you had like, it sounds like you had like just loads of different applications that you found as you were, you're probably talking to different companies and saying, hey, look, this is what we have, how could it be
Yeah.
used? Which is, I think, basically the entrepreneurial journey, right?
Yeah.
Somehow you got to food quality testing, which I think that's a big market. It's one of the only must-have type of things in the food industry, I think. I
Yeah.
mean, I think the food industry is famous, at least in my mind, it's famous for it's got to be low cost and efficient, focused on obviously quality of product because consumers react to that, but because it's food, price sensitivity is critical, right? And we see this in the research industry. A lot of smaller, medium-sized companies just don't really do any consumer research because it's a cost to them, even if it's a small amount of cost. They're like, look, I don't need to do that. It's expensive. Plus, usually they're addressing a relatively narrow, like geographical market. So learning about that market is pretty easy for them if they've been in it a while. But you, as you mentioned before, you don't want to end up in court because of like
Absolutely.
a contamination issue, right? So it's sort of one of those things where it's a overhead cost that they have no choice, they have to bear, right?
Absolutely.
So how did you get to that? Like, was it just a series of these, discovery discussions, or was there an aha moment? What happened?
I think we started with the core technology, right? And we thought,
Yep.
okay, this is really interesting. Now the question
Yep.
became then, how many people do actually need this? And what we did is we went out and, like you said, just talked to a bunch of people and kind of, went to different, as you sometimes do, as you a lot of times do. You go and you talk about what you could do, and sometimes you need to find out what the exact selling point is before you can even build it, right? So
Mhm.
that was a big part of what we did. And so today we're operating kind of inside of cured meat products. We're working with fish producers, we're working with nuts, we're working with grains, we're working with ingredients, and we're looking at other areas that we want to expand into. And you mentioned something interesting because it is true ultimately that there is a regulatory aspect and a food safety aspect, but we deal a lot with both quality and operational efficiency as well. So ultimately,
Mhm.
a lot of the times, there are some areas where there's already a pre-existing demand for the testing. But I like to compare it a little bit to what happened with printers. When Xerox first came out with the first really robust printer, I think somewhere in the 60s, but they were doing around 20 million copies were being done every single year. In just 4 years, it went to billions of copies every single year. And we're talking in the 60s. Now we've got home printers and everybody, and now we're not printing so much, but the information is flowing differently. So I think when you democratize and give access to the technology at a lower cost, and you really make sure that it is available for companies to use easily, all of a sudden you have a complete change about the philosophy. And this information about chemical composition is useful at so many different levels, where today it's not even in the regulatory. A lot of this stuff isn't in the regulatory requirements. It's simply not feasible. And I think there's always a trade-off, right? Between regulation always has to be mindful of the reality of an industry. If you end up with over-regulation in a sector where the only solution is sending a sample out to a laboratory, you'll end up killing with these overheads a lot of these small, medium enterprises. So we're quite excited about being on the forefront of really technology adoption. For me, technology is always very cool, but the really exciting thing is seeing people use this type of technology and making a difference to them. And like you're saying yourself, with the smaller companies smaller companies that don't do so much market research, why don't they do that? Well, a lot of the time it is a cost aspect, but it's also just a complexity aspect. Where do you start when you don't have a person that is, a research expert or a market analysis expert, right? Ultimately, you need to have solutions. These people might have a team that is a sales team and a growth team, and ultimately you can deliver with something that would, in a larger company, be equivalent to a whole department. And if you can deliver that easily, that's fantastic. And so that's what we're really excited about what we do. We're really excited about helping quality teams that a lot of the times are not that big. They've got really quite a dynamic, and this about the food industry, it's very operational. A lot of the time, just got to fix the stuff that comes every day. So it needs to be as easy as possible for them to adapt the technology. So for us, it's kind of that cycle of discovery, adapting the technology, and building models that can serve that purpose, and really helping companies do that in an easy way, both through a business model and a technology.
Yeah, I love it when I talk to people who kind of share like a realization about how the industry works, even if it's from a different perspective. I want to hear about how that actually works and have you describe the tech, the hardware, the software. But one thing you just said that I think is very interesting is I believe what you're sort of describing is you're saying, look, the company is operating in a certain way, right? It's been doing that for a long time, like the food company, and they don't really want to change that because it's hard to change anything. Plus, they've optimized it for specific reasons because it's a cost-driven industry, right? And so if you come to them with any sort of solution in the food industry that it causing disruption to the way they make the decisions, how they process that information that's going into their overall business, they just can't deal with it. We see this in AI, like AI of food and food, composition and things like that. I think companies are very interested in it. They're very intrigued by the gains they can make in it. So it's not that they're oblivious. It's just that their organization is not dialed up in a way to deal with making decisions in that way. And of course, they could take a leap of faith and just go and change, but it's such a low margin industry, and their brand and their quality and their food product quality and the expectation of the consumer is so like locked in that if they do anything that disrupts that, it could be very negative on the downside. So I think they look at like the positives of adopting a new tech, and they're like, I'd love to try, but I can't risk this. So you've got to come in and sort of, I say you have to meet them where they're at, right? Like you have to work with them in a way that they're already working. So I'd love to hear how your tech is working and how you've tackled that type of a challenge, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it might be good just to start a little bit with what the technology actually looks like. So I
Okay.
mentioned before that we work with optical technology. Essentially, we work with a desktop instrument that looks a little bit like a printer, you might say. And ultimately, what you have is you have a beam of light that is inciding with the sample, and that produces ultimately what we called a digital chemical fingerprint, which is ultimately just how much of the light is absorbed, how much is reflected by the product, and that contains a lot of the chemical information about the product. We then process that, and then the user has a laptop next to it. And this normally, right now we work mostly with laboratory-based settings because they provide the biggest flexibility. We want to provide an instrument, and we want to provide a solution that provides as high of an ROI as possible. And when you're producing any type of food product, you normally have multiple different raw materials. Some of them are major, some of them are minor, but they can all have an impact on your product. And then you've got different final products as well. That's normally any food company will have a couple of different products at the very least, right? And a couple of different raw materials and a few different suppliers. And if they want to go beyond that, or the reason why they don't go beyond that is ultimately that uncertainty, right, that you mentioned. So we want to help them be much more certain about quality, because that is such a big driver and such a big issue around the dynamics even within the company. So we deliver this technology. It's ultimately a hardware. We install it in the laboratory. We've got some other stuff that is portable or inline based.
Sorry, I gotta pause you.
Yeah, yeah.
How big is the hardware? Like, is it like
So
something that's got to be brought in with a truck? Is it tiny? Is
no,
it
no, no. It's a
portable? Yeah.
desktop base. So think about
Okay.
a home printer. Think about a home printer size. That's kind of the size
Okay.
of this
Okay.
instrument, right?
So you can ship it in the mail even, right?
You
Like
can
you can
ship it
ship
in
it
the
to
mail.
the.
You can
Okay.
ship it in the mail. We
Okay.
normally like to do the first. We always like to see customers using the technology as well. So we do like to do some face-to-face action in such a digitized world. I think it's always valuable as well. But I was mentioning ultimately this. Anyone can really operate this machine, right? And the reality
Mm.
of it is, in a laboratory in the food industry, there'll probably be a few different laboratory technicians. There might be a lab manager, and then there might be a quality control or a quality director above them in an average sized company, right? When we talk about these larger companies, it works a little bit differently, but you're ultimately also going to be serving somebody that has a lot of different jobs to do. And this is just a piece of information that they need to make their job happen. So you need to help them not only make it easy for them to obtain that data, but you need to also make it easy for them to bring this into their processes. And that's the other big thing, right? How do you get customers to alter their current processes? Or how do you help them create new processes? And that's a big part of what we do, because ultimately, once you've got the information, and normally we try to kind of run it side by side with their current process, and then identify the opportunities and say, look, if you had actually adjusted based on these parameters, based on this moisture content, based on the fatty acid profile, based on the vitamin content, you could ultimately have done this optimization here. And so we help them actually build these kind of regular expressions or kind of, procedures.
And are they coming to you as a mandate, like, hey, look, I have this problem, I want to solve it? Or do you sort of sell them into the solution and they get on boarded and then you start exploring ways you can help them in their business? Like, how
I think
does
there's
that?
definitely a level of education. There's definitely
Yeah.
a big level of education. I think it goes back to the fact that this industry is very operative, and you'll see, you know about this. They do things a certain way, and there's so many problems in the day to day that you think, hell, I've got enough. I've got plenty to worry about. That's why it needs to be really easy for people to take and adopt the technology. If it's not, if you don't help them through it, and
Mm.
we've seen this with some of our competitors. When you sell an instrument, when you're an instrument manufacturer, your incentive is always about selling the instrument. That doesn't help the customer. The
Mm.
instrument is supposed to do something for the customer. So we're much more focused,
Yeah.
and the way that we deliver it is we deliver both the hardware, the software, and the predictive models all bundled in a subscription, which means a couple of different things. And I think it's something interesting that we're quite excited about, which is ultimately it's not just about meeting the company where they are, like you were saying before, but meeting the person where they are. And these organizations are structured slightly differently, but ultimately the person that is responsible wants to make sure that the changes that they're implementing are going to work. And who should be
Mm.
responsible for that? Should it be the company buying, or should it be the technology provider that is providing the technology? My belief is it should be the technology provider. Ultimately, I shouldn't have to take a leap of faith. I should be able to take baby steps into a technology and then really get amazed by the technology as I use it, right? And
Yeah.
not have to do a big capex deployment that ultimately ends up with me, pulling my hair out, because over these next 8 years of amortization, I have to justify this instrument, and I don't have the know-how necessarily, because now I don't have the data processing abilities. And we know this because we started as a software-only company, and eventually decided, look, there's too many people, there's too many stuff that is happening with the hardware that we don't like. So we need to have the companies really
Ah.
help them through
That's
this.
interesting. And you're able to, sorry, I'm jumping around a little bit, but
No, no, I love it.
the hardware is low cost enough to produce that you can offer a model like that. Because a lot of these sensors, I mean, I don't know a lot about them, but I see them at some food shows that I've gone through and stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, clearly there's a lot of engineering and tech in them, and they're also, it seems quite expensive to produce, period, right? So like
Yeah,
and they're big.
and that's
Yeah,
another
yeah,
point. And I
yeah.
think the reality is the food industry, if demonstrated that they will gain valuable results, they will commit. They will really commit, and it will be a long-term partnership. So while the instruments are expensive, and we do partner with instrument manufacturers to actually, be able to offer this and make it make sense for us as well, and make it make sense for the customer as well. We think that it's much more interesting ultimately when you have a no capex model, and you can offer not just the capex, but but the whole solution, ultimately the result that you're looking to get. And that might not just be the analytical result, it might be the final process optimizations, right? That you're looking to get. That's the real key to it, right? So while the hardware is expensive, I think that is another big driver as to why a solution like this is very interesting. A lot of companies are not necessarily, again, when you go back to the person that is sponsoring the project, the person that is saying, okay, I like this, I like the opportunities that lie in here for me, but I'm not an expert in this technology. And all of a sudden, I'm responsible for making a decision about the next 8 years of this company and how we're going to be producing. I think it makes no sense, really, these types of models. So why not, and help them through the process, give them something that economically is going to make sense, but also just operationally is going to make sense. So while the hardware is expensive, we are able to provide a solution that is, is essentially on a head-to-head comparison, is kind of a no-brainer, and that's without, starting to account for other stuff like, cost of capital and what's the risk downside of, buying the technology and not being able to implement it successfully, and these types of things, especially in that bracket, that mid-sized food company bracket, that are ultimately the ones producing the largest amount of food products, which I think is something interesting. Most people think about the brands that they all know and that like come to mind, but they produce really a fraction of total food produced. Most is produced by small, medium enterprises across the industry, and they're the ones that really need technology to continue to advance, right? Because they don't have the R&D teams, they don't have the guys that are looking at market research, they don't have the guys that are doing all these things that can take the time to provide the results. They need a solution, and they need somebody to come with them. So I think that's why we're excited not only about technology, but also about how we make sure that technology gets to consumers, especially in an industry like this.
I mean, I have to say, I've also been around this industry now for, oh gosh, 8 years or so, 8, 9 years. I totally resonates with me what you're saying in terms of you're a bit of an outsider to food, me too. And when I looked at the way in which these companies behave, and now that I appreciate more kind of their quote unquote slow decision making, I really understand it. But I also feel even more strongly for these small and medium producers because they're not able to afford the sophistication that's required to do like the very best of what's out there. A lot of cases they don't need it, that's fine, right? But in a lot of cases they just can't afford to even have an internal person that's responsible for these things, right? And so therefore they just are reluctant to make any sort of changes. And I think that is they could be more competitive, versus the international brand that all of them are competing with some international brand in their segment, right? These national brands, probably a lot of these national brands and national producers you deal with, they're all competing with the big ones. It's just that they might compete locally and be better or number two, right? But they're still competing, and they're significantly outgunned, right? in terms of capability.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think there's a massive market for that. And you could argue that it's a growing market because it makes more sense to produce food locally and to know the market locally if you can.
100%.
So I think there's an argument to be made that there's going to be even more of these kind of micro brands out there in the future, also because of transportation costs of a final product, right?
Really agree. And I think helping anything that helps the industry be more dynamic is always a positive drive in that direction. So I
Yeah.
think there's been a lot of rigidity, for example, on the raw material side is tremendously interesting. But we talk to a lot of companies that say, look, we've been supplying ourselves with these two guys for this product for,
Mm.
a decade, 2 decades, and it's always worked for us. I said, what if you all of a sudden could not worry so much about the quality, and you could really give your purchase team also the ability to scout and bring in real opportunities. And this is a dynamic that we see quite often. And to people that are in
Mm.
the food industry, this will resonate. But there's always a big struggle between, purchasing wants better pricing and they want to secure a longer term contract. And all of a sudden they come up with a new supplier that is going to supply this specific ingredient or meat or whatever it's going to be. And then R&D and quality are thinking, Jesus, this is really going to be a horrible year ahead because we have no clue about the supplier. We really don't know how they work. And so there's a lot of struggle. There's a lot of friction in that relationship. And so all of a sudden, if you can have information about the quality, about the composition of products, you don't need to be so unsure about what's happening. And the reality is, why are they unsure? Because right now, a lot of stuff is standard operating procedures. Most of the testing that is happening in terms of chemical testing, and I think it's important to make this separation. There's some really cool companies doing real-time analysis for microbiology, and we can talk about that in a second. But chemical testing is typically used for either specific regulatory requirements in certain industries or commercial applications. So you sell that to a retailer, or you sell that to another business that then uses it for something else. But that's really as far as the extent of testing goes. And a lot of the times it's randomized, and randomized in an industry where variability is so high gives you quite a bad overview of what's happening. And so we really believe that by being able to test so much more, by being able to actually be able to see so much more of the quality, all of a sudden it creates a huge new paradigm where it affects not just quality, but it affects purchasing. It affects your ability to make decisions that typically you would be more constrained of because your process is so rigid. And all of a sudden, by having the dynamic aspect in quality, by having the ability to really check what it is that you're getting, not just trust that you're getting what you're supposed to get, you all of a sudden can make a lot of different decisions that you wouldn't be able to do in the past.
It sounds just awesome. I mean, I know we had a lot of talking points to go through, but maybe if we could dig into a few more of those points. But how do you envision scaling this, right? Like, how do you envision getting to multiple locations? Like, do you go into a client and then try to get them to put it in multiple locations? Like, because ultimately for a product like yours, I mean, you were in the consumer space, right? If you're addressing a B2B space that's this diversified and that fragmented as the one, you're really solving a problem for. I mean, maybe someday you'll work for the Nestle's of the world, right? That's a different animal. Um, but you need like a lot of word of mouth, kind of almost virality in a B2B product. Have you thought about how to make that happen? Because otherwise you're burdened with a lot of sales and business development costs, which of course is probably hard, right?
Yeah, I think we were talking about it a little bit earlier, right?
Yeah.
Just before starting as well. I think there's a lot of tools right now that you can use to improve kind of how you go through that process. I think technology together with human touch in terms of doing sales will be defining a completely new paradigm. I think there's a lot of stuff that you can do before the human gets involved that helps you sell to the right people who are in the right place. So there's a lot of stuff with AI and stuff that you can support in terms of that, and there's certainly a lot of products that we're looking at. For us, it's still quite early days in terms of doing that, and for us, we do a lot of that process manually, and we think that it's quite useful to talk to a lot of people, even if we don't necessarily have the exact fit or the exact solution for them at the moment. But we do think about the world in terms of these segments, right? I think you mentioned that there is so much it's quite so varied, the food industry. People do so many different things that ultimately we think about the food industry in terms of segments. I mentioned, for example, cured meat products. I mentioned fish. I mentioned ingredients. I mentioned nuts. These are kind of the ways that we see the world for us in terms of serving these industries. And ultimately, there you typically do have, shared problems, shared pains that we can address. But that does mean that we do have quite an international, it forces us to become international very early on. So currently we're a company based in Spain, and most of our customers are based in Spain. We've got a few multinational customers that do bring our technology to different sites, and that's kind of what we hope also happens with companies, whether local or international. We go in, we really prove ourselves on a factory, a problem, a specific need, and then grow from there as we showcase the capabilities. But we also do think about the industry ultimately. Cured meat products have similar issues in Spain, in Italy, in France, in Germany, in the UK, in the US. So ultimately, we can bring this know-how and also our capabilities. We're quite a data-hungry company that uses or develops our own data sets, develops solutions based on this data that ultimately, by verticalizing into these segments, we can better scale inside of those areas. So it's a combination of both, I think, being as smart as you can about the business development. That is certainly not something that we figured out by any measure, but we hope to continue to improve upon and figure out, and then prove within these certain industries where you're completely right. I think there is a critical mass or tipping point inside of these sectors where a lot of these guys came from the same place. A lot of the time you see industries that are quite concentrated in a certain region or locality, and it's because the guy who started in the 1920s, eventually somebody who worked for them in the 50s decided, hey, I think I could do this, went and did another company, and then went and did another company from there. And so you end up with quite a centralized, or you end up with hubs that are producing specific products. So I think there's a certain advantage to that, and we certainly try to leverage that also in our sales cycle and make the market as big as possible for us by going international very early on.
Yeah, I suppose you could get also acquired by companies that would make it as a bolt-on or something like this, or invested in. Yeah, go to market is so difficult at scale. Do
Yeah.
you find that like the traditional testing methodologies are getting replaced in some cases by your technology, or are you still doing things that are new, different, and then gradually convincing people to switch, right?
It's quite complementary. I think it
Yeah,
is quite complementary at the moment. Again,
yeah,
because of the nature of the testing that is going on right now. When you're doing a
yeah.
little bit of random testing, there are some companies that have some use cases which are very, very heavy on for example, they're doing positive release on some products, and they're getting results in days. There's a very heavy use case on testing that is already going on and that is getting replaced, right? But typically what we see is a little bit different. It's testing that you hadn't wasn't within scope because it just cost money and took you time. And we're talking that a typical laboratory will have a turnaround on results that is over 5 working days. So it's not very operational by any measure. If decisions take you 5 days to make, even if the food industry in general cycles move slow, the day to day moves very quickly. You need to have the inventory that is moving continuously. You need to be shipping product out, getting new product in, and so also just the nature, the perishable nature of the industry just forces that, right? So we do find that there's quite a complementary aspect. Then when it comes to regulatory, one of the things is, if you want to have a great analysis, very specific, very precise analysis, by all means, I think you should be sending that to an external laboratory. But why not do the check before? Right? Check
Mm,
everything that you're producing. Check batch to batch, and
mhm.
ultimately, if you have an issue, you have an issue with a supplier, you get something, it's flagged, the system flags it, it's out of spec. Then you can always go back and send that to a laboratory, get your report, and that has wider acceptance. And I think one of the parts is, I think we'll get to a critical point where these types of technologies will be widely accepted as a method of exchanging trust between companies. But in the meantime, you've
Mhm.
always got the traditional system where you can always on a punctual basis use that externally. So I think it is quite complementary. I think ultimately the big change is the volume of testing, like I was saying, like the Xerox printer. How much do you use this technology? Well, all of a sudden, if it's real time, if it's much more, if it's 2 orders of magnitude cheaper to test, all of a sudden it's really, really a no-brainer. And the performance is extremely high, comparable to laboratories in many cases. So really, we are delivering the precision and the trust in the system that companies need to make sure that they're making the right decisions.
Yeah, I mean, so much of it resonates with me, and it makes a ton of sense also how you're approaching it. It's impressive. I've met a lot of entrepreneurs in the food industry, I have to say, and a lot of them, I think they believe in this sort of disruptive approach to innovation. And I don't know if that flies in the food industry as well. I'm sure it does in many cases, but we're so conditioned to think about digital tech and what goes on there, that, as you mentioned, like these cycles of change, it's like a 15, 30-year generation of innovation cycle, the way that people do things. And yeah, it's like phases. Like there's like these long phase changes. And yeah, it's interesting and impressive that you've been able to also, get investors on board. I presume, you're telling this story to them too, that there's it's not like overnight that people change the way they do things in
Absolutely,
a
and,
space
and
like
and
that.
everything that we do, and ultimately that's an important thing. Also, I think the whole industry won't change as a whole, but the industry is so densely populated that ultimately, I think it's about being very effective in getting the first, starting on that, early adopter to main market cycle. And I think there's a lot of things that we can do to shorten the cycle. That's one of the big things that we need, right? How do we shorten the cycle of adoption? And I think there's different things, amongst them, this no capex offering, amongst them also helping them in the integration of the technology, amongst them also just being very conscientious about industries, because it's much easier if, instead of trying to buy it at the whole thing, you go very much industry by industry. And I think there you can make a real difference that is much faster, right? Because while I think being very aware of the 15-year cycles. I think ultimately we don't. It's not where we want to see the change happening quicker, right? We think that the change needs to happen quicker. So it's all about also reducing and making sure that these cycles are, or at least cycles of adoption, are as short as possible. And I think we're having good success in that sense. I think it's just about really, like you said before, it's about meeting them where they are and helping them get to the next stage. I think philosophical selling doesn't do so much for the food industry, right? The fact that the food industry will be quality in general, everything from microbiology to chemical testing to contaminant testing, will be somehow digitally based. And when I say digital, I mean that the signal, it will produce some sort of signal. We won't make or we won't have as much of a chemical based or traditional chemistry based systems. Or microbiology based systems. I still think, while it's no doubt a fact that it will be that way, I think the question is, okay, how do we make this happen? And I'm really always excited about the interaction, and me and Henrik have a lot of conversations about this, right? Henrik is definitely a visionary in the industry, and there's a lot of things around, where do we see the industry is going to go? And the question is, how do we meet it on the way there, and how do we help it get quicker there, right? How do we make sure that it's not 15 years, that we're talking about an 8-year cycle for the adoption of this type of technology in these new sectors? How to make sure it's a 5-year cycle? So those are the types of things that we do think a lot about while handling all of the other stuff that happens on a day-to-day basis as well.
That's awesome. Well, I mean, it's important work, right? Like keeping the world fed and safe is
Exciting.
just about one of the more important things you can do.
The good thing is we always need to eat, so we need to make sure that we do our best to make sure that they eat good products at the right cost and the right quality as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's an exciting space. I think in general the food industry doesn't get enough airtime because people take it for granted. But without all these little tiny bits and bytes of service and technology, we wouldn't be able to go grocery shopping and get what we need, right? So
I think it's
hey
amazing.
man, yeah, it's
Way.
great talking to you. Love to stay in touch. We'll put links to your website on the page. And what do you think is going to happen, in the future for you guys? Are you going to any events, or do you exhibit any places that people might know about?
So we're not exhibiting in any specific place. I think we're going to a lot of different small fairs. I actually think the smaller places are always more intimate and better to get in contact with. But we're always online, always available. I love people just connecting, LinkedIn, whatever it is.
Yeah,
I'm always a yes answer and want to hear what people have to say and connect to people. Probably because
yeah.
I'm doing it to a lot of other people. So I feel like there's a reciprocity there that is very nice about sharing and connecting. So anybody that wants to connect, I would be very excited to do so and hear your thoughts about everything that we're saying, right? About we're theorizing. It's always good to get challenged as well. Yeah, Daniel, I'm super excited to have been here with you, chatted with you guys. Love what you guys are doing, and we'll definitely stay in touch.
Thanks so much. Yeah, so it's on the web. It's www.chemometricbrain.io. You said
That's
there's going
right.
to be a bit of a name change, but anyway, I'm sure that people can find it there. We'll put that on there as well as your LinkedIn address. And yeah, all the best to you, and talk to you soon.
Exciting. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
You too.